I can remember looking through the front windscreen and thinking, oh heck, this bus seems to be going awfully fast and I think something's going to happen.
We got up and went over the top, to go down again. And all at once it picked up speed and that was it.
We got to the top of the hill and I looked and I thought, oh, what a lovely view. As I looked over, I saw all this black smoke coming up the side of the bus, outside of the bus. And then the next thing I knew, I heard the sound, awful sound of rushing wind. Oh, it was terrible. And then I heard the sound of breaking glass. And I knew no more.
This coach, carrying 44 women from the North Yorkshire town of Thornaby-on-Tees, crashed through Dibbles Bridge, killing 31 and the driver. 14 were seriously injured. The crash robbed Thornaby of some of its most active voluntary and charity workers, and its memory still stirs painful emotions in the town. Yet Dibbles Bridge has largely been forgotten by the nation, even though it was instrumental in saving lives through improved coach safety. All the more remarkable since it remains the country's worst road disaster.
The cottage is about 30 yards from the bridge, the wall of the bridge. And we were in the kitchen preparing for a barbecue, just the two of us there. And I heard what sounded like an explosion, which was the bus coming over the bridge, coming over a low wall, which caused the bus to turn upside down, so it landed on its roof. When I looked out from the kitchen, that's what I saw.
3 teenagers camping in a neighbouring field heard the screech of the bus handbrakes and went to the aid of the victims when it landed nearby.
We had a fry up going.
We did.
It was frying bacon or whatever then, and then bang, bang, bang.
Because I actually stood up and saw it, the impact. I stood up and I watched it and I saw it hit the bend, went forward a bit more, hit it again, then it went up like that and just went over like that.
I heard it.
It was still very quiet. There was the ticking of the engine, the metal of the engine, which was hot and expanding or contracting, but no other noise really.
Yeah.
When we got there, it was silent. There was nothing.
Absolutely.
The people who was still alive was stunned. You could tell them.
Yeah, there was no noise at all, was there? Yeah.
There was only us 3 and the farmer or the guy and his wife for, I would think, for about 30 minutes. At least 30 minutes.
Assessed in a very unprofessional way as much as we could, tried to see who was alive and who could be eased out without doing more damage to them, but we had no expertise or particular skills. We were there on our own.
Well, no mobile phones in them days, was there?
No.
So
because we
I rang up and flagged somebody down.
That's right, you did.
Yeah.
You did. And when the ambulance driver come,
Just
and one ambulance driver, and his face drained, didn't it? His face drained. That's right.
He said something on his radio like, "This is an A1 or whatever. This is an A1. I repeat, A1." And with that, it all happened, didn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody started to come.
I was in the office at Skipton on my own when that message came through by a gentleman, it would appear, from Halifax. And from there all I could do was get all the amenities there as quickly as I could. And Skipton's a very busy place on the bank holiday. And at that time, we had 3 traffic wardens of that time of day and 2 constables out on the town. and I contacted the 5 of them and put them in positions to make sure all the junctions were clear to allow the ambulances to come through, to come from the scene to get to Airedale Hospital.
And I went down and looked over, and I couldn't believe what I saw. Like, it was just total wreck. I went back home and got a digger, some jacks and some planks, which we didn't use because it were going to be a fragile job getting these people out.
We're talking from a 21st century perspective, when everybody, all the emergency services have specialist rescue equipment. They were using hand tools to free people from inside this coach. They were using hacksaws to cut through seat frames. They were unbolting seats to make access easier, and it was a long and slow process.
And when we managed to get all them out to make sure there was nobody still alive, I crawled right through the back there, but there was absolutely no chance, because with the incline of the land rising up, you can see where it rises up there.
We stayed there with the ambulance crews and the police and helped as much as we could, carrying stretchers to the ambulances, and eventually towards the end of the day everybody had been pulled out one way or another.
I remember crying, climbing up the hill, but that was my release then. I cried for about an hour, I remember.
Yeah, I remember.
And then after that it seemed to settle down, and then,
yeah,
life goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Just thinking about the poor people.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't like to kick a fuss about it.
No, that's right.
I thought we only did what any human being
would do.
Most human beings do. That's all we did.
Yeah.
There was really nothing else for us to do, and we didn't want to stay, so we left. And as I recall, we went to a hotel in Pateley Bridge and then came back down to London.
The place, the cottage, did you visit subsequently?
No.
You never went back? The trip organiser, Dorothy White, was described as the Good Samaritan of Thornaby. She served as Lady Mayoress of the town, and for over 30 years she brought the community together, organising trips for senior citizens and facilities for young people.
She always had a love of the Dales, and she loved sort of culture, and as children we were always taken to places like Richmond Castle, places of interest. She always wanted to expand our education. We did go to the seaside like everybody else, but there was always maybe a bit of culture at the back of most of our trips.
She was definitely a Yorkshire woman, without doubt. Born in Thornaby, went to live in Hawes. That was because my grandfather was 7 years out of work. I think there was a bit more money in the family there. Virtually couldn't afford to feed him properly. And I'm convinced, quietly, that one of the reasons she organised the bus trips, which nearly always went into the Dales, as a way of getting into the Dales to see what's happening. She enjoyed it so much. She loved the Dales.
And by going on bus trips, this was one way that they could do it cheaply. If you went by train, it was expensive. If you went by a bus with a lot of other people, then you shared the cost.
Dorothy White. She was a good organiser. She used to say, back at the coach prompt if we got off and had a cup of tea and that. Maybe now and again you would know where you were going, but not a lot. They were all mystery trips. And they were always lovely places that we went to. Yes, poor lass.
My mother lived for these trips out, and she loved travelling. And her and Dorothy, she was Labour mayoress. Mother was a member of the Conservative Party and helped at elections, but they got on like a house on fire, which was very pleasant, very nice. They were people, not politicians.
She was everything that I would expect or have ever wanted of a gran to be. And that was somebody that was always there for me, always there with a smile. She was never ever down in the dumps. I don't ever remember being down in the dumps, really.
It's a very good likeness of Mum. That is Mum. She was a widow then, so she was on her own with the two boys. She really enjoyed going on the trips. She really did. She went on all of them, I'm sure. I don't think she ever missed one.
When we used to stay there, when my mum went into hospital to have a baby or anything, we always used to go and stay with Grandma. She'd look after us while Mum had the baby and to be home for a little while.
My mum was lovely, and
she used to come in when we were kids, and she didn't used to have to say anything.
No.
We always used to say to each other, "We better behave, my mum's quiet."
Yeah. Saturday or the weekend before the crash, and she'd been round to see us, and when she babysit or she was round here, I used to walk her back to Essex Street. "No, you're all right, son," she said. "I walk back by myself, it's late." And I remember walking down towards Camden Street. She stopped at the corner and she waved to us, and I waved back, and that was the last time I seen my mum alive.
And then I went back home and we learnt that, yes, she had been on the bus trip. Obviously, she was involved. Yeah. We certainly didn't know that day that she wasn't coming home.
Next thing I knew, that I was at my sister's house, and a news flash came up and said about the accident in the Dales, and I just knew straight away. I said to my sister, "Grandma's on that coach," and she got a little bit upset with me because she said, "Don't be silly," But I ran all the way home from my sister's to my mum's, and when I got to our house, I could hear my mum crying, so I knew that she was on there. And it was quite a while before we found out that she'd actually died.
I suddenly had a feeling that something had happened to my gran, and it was like a reaching out, and as if she didn't speak to me. It was the feeling that I had that she was reaching out to me, and I was highly agitated. And I said to my next door neighbour, because I was walking around the garden in a bit of a tiz was, and she said to me, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I don't know, but there's something wrong, and I think that my gran has been killed."
Oh, they gave us the phone numbers. We were on the phone at our house. My mum's friends round the corner were on the phone. My dad's sister was on the phone, which was, when you think about it, was probably silly because they couldn't take all these calls. Anyway, eventually, my mum's friend got through, and they were able to tell her that she was alive. And that came through the description of what she was wearing. And then we just all set off.
I did go and I found a book with all the names in, so I took that down to the police station and spoke to the desk sergeant and asked him he said, "I've come about the bus trip." He was a bit blunt, but understandably maybe it's because he was getting a massive people are making inquiries. And I said, well, I think this may be of interest to you. And I opened the book and said, I think that's a list of everybody on the bus, at which point his attitude understandably changed. I mean, I'm not criticising this guy at all, because he must have been under a lot of pressure.
For finding out whether my mum was in it or not, I mean, we were all here. All waiting, the whole family were sat in here, and the door knocked and it was a reporter. How do you feel? We said, pardon? How do you feel with losing your mum? Nobody had told us.
We didn't know.
We didn't know.
At that point, no.
At that point, the police hadn't arrived to let us know whether she'd survived or not.
The rescue was a particularly difficult one for the ambulance drivers, both because of the remote spot where the accident took place and because of all the traffic left over from the holiday weekend. 14 survivors, all of whom are women, have been brought here with what are described as serious injuries. All of the 32 dead have also been brought here to the hospital, which is being used as a temporary base for the operation.
We had half an hour between being told of the accident and the first people arriving. Within half an hour, well, I'd say within quarter of an hour, we had all the staff we needed, but we didn't know what we were getting. So everybody stayed, and there were a lot of people waiting. There were consultants by the door waiting.
And all I can say really of the night is that how well the hospital reacted to such a massive disaster in our area, and how well everything came together and gelled.
Everybody worked around the site. The doctors lived just across the road. Doctors lived in the flats. Nurses lived in the flats. And so to get a massive workforce together very quickly were easy. And did. It happened very quick. We were all there waiting for it.
Yes, Airedale had only been opened in 1970, and things were state of the art at that time. You know, we were up there with the top hospitals in the area. And A&E was brand new A&E, all the new equipment, and so we were very well placed really to take the casualties.
You just could not fault the hospital. They were absolutely brilliant, and it must have been horrific for them and for the staff. You know, they had to meet everybody and tell them bad news. You know.
We were well looked after. They were very nice. The nurses were all lovely. They were very gentle when they touched you, you know, to help you sit up or whatever, or to do your bones. They were very clever.
I sort of came round and opened my eyes, and then I was off again. And I had me in bed next time. I wasn't that bad. I had a knock here and a knock there, and but not as bad as the others.
It was like you had to go across a quadrangle to get to the ward that she was in. And, we sort of went through the door to go across, and it was so many people there. And I remember my dad got hold of me, and I just said to Dad, I know all these people. And obviously people like us had travelled, but the majority of them unfortunately weren't lucky, whether they were there basically to identify.
And then we had to identify my mother, and I had to actually ask to see her engagement ring, which was very distinctive. So that's how that's the day.
I said, I'll just go and get a coffee. And I went to this area and there was lots of people. And then I realised they were pals from school, people I knew on the streets. And I asked one young guy who I knew, how was his mum? And he said his mum had died, but there was a lady in intensive care and everyone was clinging to the hope that that lady, maybe, just maybe, it was their mum. And I felt awful that here they all were and my mum was still alive, for which I thank God, and I was extremely happy about that. But the overwhelming grief that was in that area. It was palpable.
You talk to people and you try to comfort people. People try to comfort you, and the day after you're still in the daze, aren't you? You can't really grasp it until you walk in that room and you've got to identify your mum. And yeah, something you never forget.
The mortuary was soon filled, so they made arrangements for some of the people to be laid in the chapel. The chapel was used every weekend for the services and the patients to go down. So it was incredible, really, that they managed to think of that, because it's a pretty little place.
There was a total blackout. There was no newspapers or radio or television allowed at the time, so we didn't know any information at all. Didn't have any information about how many people had survived or died or anything, no, or the state of the crash at all, no. It was telling, and even when visitors came in, they didn't say anything.
There weren't allowed newspapers in the wards. Until people were able, I think, to ask for themselves what had happened to other people. They didn't want them to read it, to be told by strangers. They wanted somebody that they knew there as well when they were actually told.
I saw the cuttings, yes, and I thought, how on earth did I get out of that coach, because it was so squashed looking. Yeah, it's really amazing that I did survive, and my mum survived, yes. Yes, when there were so many people killed.
Gladys, Joan and Doreen were inseparable, and they were typical of the many close friendships that formed on the trips.
And I was in one ward, Joan was in the other, and we kept saying, wonder where Gladys is. Wonder where Gladys is. And then we found she'd been killed.
Mm. The biggest shock on that day was when the work was cooling off for me and the ambulances started to go straight past A&E to the mortuary. But it was an awful sight to see so many ambulances going straight past rather than stopping. You knew everybody there were dead. And that was the first real time I had an idea of the impact of the crash.
And it was a pleasure to look after the ladies. But they were all so grateful to be alive. I can remember that. That stood out for me, just being as a young nurse.
And the driver was still trapped, partly in and partly out of the cab, and he'd been looked after initially by passing motorists, and he had in fact been able to speak to them, and he'd already indicated to them that he'd had problems both with the gears on the coach and with the braking system, and he said essentially that it was a brake failure. Okay, we're now on the descent to Dibbles Bridge, and it's not straight, but it's got no massive bends on it until we get right down into the bottom at the bridge itself, and at that point the road swings almost 90 degrees right across the bridge and up the other side. And it was at this point that the driver had already run into problems, missed a gear, the brakes had overheated, and the coach was well out of control. And he came down here, and where the black metal railings are here, it went straight through there. The coach had been serviced approximately a week before the incident. New brake linings had been fitted, but it turned out that there was a problem and that there was no braking on one of the rear wheels whatsoever.
If this had happened today, it would have been 1,000 times worse for the relatives, because we would have been plagued by someone had to be hung for the event. The insurance companies, the lawyers would have driven you mad. It was an accident. It was a tragic accident, but there was nobody running around calling for heads to roll. It was a different era, a much gentler era.
I remember we used to always have Tim's coaches wherever we went. I mean, especially with the church. I mean, all the church outings we always had his coaches for whatever. One of the friends of the family. I think he had a very bad nervous do at the time, but he got cancer, and it was just that did for him. You know, he was never the same after that.
Local people responded to the many accidents at Dibbles Bridge. Over the years, they've brought their skills and their comfort to victims of an accident black spot that has killed 43 people. Ken Longthorne is a celebrated local holier whose family once lived at Dibbles Bridge.
Now that's me dad on the left-hand side of them three people working there, looking down onto the crash. My father told me he was there in 1925 when the bus came down from York.
This is the paper from June 12th, 1925. That was a sad day. My father went to that. He weren't so far away, weren't my dad? And the visions of that crash, and he could still see it for about 3 or 4 months after. That's what it does to people.
Now I went up as soon as we heard about the crash, and the poor fella there had just got out in time. It had come down the hill and his brakes, he couldn't get round the corner. I don't think he was doing a great speed, but he couldn't stop the wagon. So as it was going on the corner, he jumped out. I went up and the poor fella, he'd had a bit of an accident. So I says, I better come down to my place and I'll give you some trousers and wash the off. So I took him down, and I had a hose pipe, so we hosed him down, cold water, bring him to his senses, and then dried him off in front of a space heater, put him some trousers on and took him back up. By that time the law had landed and everybody else, and they tried to, I took him back and they said, you can't go there. I said, I'll fetch the driver back. Well, we thought you were dead.
In 2014, cyclist James Nelson failed to return home from a training session after going over the parapet. His body was found the next morning by the stream. A year later, consultant cardiologist Dr. George Ballard fell into the stream and died after his bike hit the bridge.
At Lockerbie there's probably 2 or more memorials. The Selby train crash has a memorial at the side of the line at Great Heck, and yet there is nothing whatsoever to mark the site of what is still Britain's worst road accident with 33 people killed, and that does surprise me.
Members of Thornaby Town Council are trying to address this. They lead a campaign for memorials both in Thornaby-on-Tees and at Dibbles Bridge itself, but they're astonished at what they find at the scene.
You'd think the road would have been improved, wouldn't you, in that time?
Absolutely.
You know,
yeah.
it's still a two-lane road that's going into a single-lane track even today, and it's still a 90-degree bend near enough. I mean, you'd think there would be some improvement, wouldn't you?
Well, it's in the national parks.
Did I miss something about the signage coming down here?
It's about it does say low gear, doesn't it? Steep incline as you come down.
Well, wouldn't you think there'd be a bit more, sort of?
Yeah. I mean, there's no chevrons across the road or lines to say reduce speed now, or there is very limited signage as you come down the bank to say
danger, accident, black
spot. Yeah.
If it had been anywhere else, there'd have been 1,000 signs up. There'd have been road improvements. There'd have been everything.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't. There's nothing here to signify that the worst road accident in this country,
absolutely,
loss of life, happened here. There's nothing, is there? Not to mark. If it was me, that's where I'd be looking for the memorial, because it gives a clear sight of the road, the bridge, where unfortunately the coach ended up. It's even a motive for us now, isn't it, when you stand here and I don't know, sometimes you think, are you doing the right thing? And you think, is it right?
Those people deserve to be remembered.
They do.
Can you see any signposts? Now this lorry's going steady. But there's nothing to tell you where the corner is. Look, if you look down there, you can't see the bloody corner. You know, basically all it says is low gear. Down into low gear. Well, this wagon, it'll weigh 44 tonne, and we're doing about 5 mile an hour now. But you see, if anybody walks out in front of that lorry, he'll probably be able to stop dead, because his brakes are holding him and he's down in low gear. He saw a car coming and he's pulled up, but he could pull up, he's going at a safe speed. And they're still treating it with great respect. As I tell you, you've got to respect the hills or they'll kill you. It's as simple as that.
John Lowe has always been passionate about buses and public transport. He served as a director of Cleveland Transit for 10 years, becoming an authority on road safety. John returns to the site where his mother died over 40 years ago to find out if Dibbles Bridge is any safer than it was then.
Since the accident happened and the inquest and the recommendations, virtually nothing has been done to improve safety at this point. And I hope that there isn't another tragedy. I'm quite sure that there is a way of continuing the armour guard barrier across the bridge. Maybe not in the conventional way, but bolting it to and through the stonework, firmly anchored at either end. It wouldn't be the normal sort of crash barrier, but it would be better than the situation we have now where there is nothing. It was Britain's worst ever road accident and long may it remain so, because it must never happen again.
The coaches of the 1970s were death traps, and they offered little protection to passengers. Now, electronic retarders and intarders are standard safety devices. Fitted to the bus drive shaft, the retarders prevent the overheating on brakes that caused the Thornaby coach to crash. After the disaster, politicians like Thornaby MP Ian Wrigglesworth fought in Parliament to legislate for safer coaches.
And I came to understand how the retarders operated and raised questions in Parliament and pressed ministers to introduce these on a statutory basis. Now, There's always a problem in getting governments to introduce statutory requirements because it means that there's got to be legislative time, it's got to go through Parliament, the trade has got to agree to it, so there's always a battle goes on. But I felt we'd made enough progress when it was agreed that all coaches and public service vehicles should have this sort of equipment fitted so that it couldn't happen again.
Andrew Howick was one of the responders from the area who assisted at the scene of the 1975 crash. Andrew now runs Hargreaves Coaches, a local company established over 100 years ago. What safety benefits did the disaster help to bring about?
Nowadays, as we have a look further up this coach of ours here, everything's electronic, even the doors opening and closing. We've got a middle door on this as nowadays, whereas in the olden days you didn't have middle doors, you had an emergency parachute door at the back. Point belts here, sure. 3-point belts come round every seat, one of these click in, 3-point belts, there we go, pop it back in. The rulings came in that any coaches built after that accident had to start having rollover facilities within the vehicle. Underneath there is big piece of steel going right over and down the other side. Those are massive, those. There'll be a very, very big piece of steel down here. Again, going up, roll over for the front corner here, back down and back down the other side there, you see. This should not happen again if a coach rolled over and dropped down a dip. And all vehicles have that standard. All coaches now have that standard.
Nowadays, most modern vehicles have retarders or intarders. It's better and safer. It's better than burning your brakes out. It's a really good bit of kit you need when you're up and down the dales. I'm going down now on the intarder. What we tend to do, we just tend to put it on at number 4 or 5 and we just let it roll down on its own accord, and it does everything else for you. Just to bring us steady again. Around the corner, and then all you have to do is press the accelerator, it turns itself off and you're back away again.
She was like the pinnacle in our family. She was the main person, the kingpin, and she looked after all the grandchildren, obviously, that were just up and coming. There was a lot of us. We all relied on her a lot.
Nothing you can say really, is there?
It's a remote but beautiful place, isn't it?
Yeah. Happy memories of the good times we had coming on.
Yeah. Thinking about all the times we had when we were kids and stuff, were good times, yeah.
You can't dwell on this.
On the badness, yeah.
It would affect the rest of your life.
If people can get here to reflect on what happened, it's closure, isn't it?
There you go, Mother.
They'll never ever be forgotten by the close families. Obviously there'll be other families in the same position that we were. They'll never ever be forgotten. It's always here with us. You remember it on a daily basis. But in future generations, you tell your children, my children know about it, my sister's children know about it, but it will eventually, I suppose, the story becomes a little less significant, and it was such a tragedy for so many people that I think a memorial would be a nice thing to have.
This is the bag that Nana took with her on that day, and she'd got new shoes because she was so excited to go, and she always took care of herself. She always had a nice matching necklace and earrings, and my auntie had said to her, "Fancy getting new shoes because your feet are going to be so sore," and she just laughed, and sadly all that came back was the shoes, the bag and the necklace.
After everything was sorted out, we were given possessions back that they'd sorted out after the accident, and we were given one shoe. And it was a pair that I'd bought her for her birthday in April. And I hadn't actually paid for them yet on my Barclay card.
I would never ever want to go through any of that again. And the worst part to me about it was just waiting to find out whether she was alive or dead, you know, which was, I never want to go through hours and hours of that again. I mean, it's been the best thing in the world that she's still here. And if you ask Mum what she thinks, she just tells you that, you know, she was very, very lucky, and she feels lucky to be here still, you know.
Because of the love that I had for her and the love that we had for each other, the consequences were that I came home and of course took her to that fateful bus, which I've got to say haunted me for years. And that feeling of guilt.
And I used to go down my fields, and for a long time after it just felt like a graveyard. Yeah, I think about it fairly regular actually. But I think about the people that was back in Thornaby.
Some people are quite dismissive and saying after all this time you should forget about things like that, but you can't. It just comes back like it was yesterday, and it's there always, never goes away. And the pain, it dulls, but it's there always.
I don't remember very much about my childhood, my school days, or anything really before the crash. Even my kids' childhoods, I don't remember very much. The only time I'll remember things is perhaps looking at some photographs. Well, I think it's just the after effects of the crash. Bit sad really, because it would have been nice to remember what kind of things we did. It just jog your memory a little bit when you see a photograph of something. Well, I'm sorting them out into different categories, and eventually I'm going to make books for my 4 children, so that they've got all the memories of all the photographs of their relations, so that it doesn't get lost, and it'd be just nice to look back on them and see all the happy times.
This is for you, my love. God bless. You know, looking across at where the accident actually happened, and the parapet of the bridge here, it is so beautiful. You couldn't really wish for a nicer place to die. It's just, it's a beautiful spot to be treasured by those who will continue to remember.
Thornaby Town Council planned to erect a memorial to all the victims at this spot near Dibbles Bridge. However, the landowner has refused permission for it to be installed. The road is still considered an accident black spot, and safety concerns like the lack of parking spaces influence this disappointing decision. Now the council devote their energies to the memorial planned for Thornaby itself. The nearby Coldstones Quarry has donated stone for the memorial. Quarry manager Richard Green has led the search for a suitable piece of stone after receiving the council's specifications. Mayor of Thornaby Steve Walmsley and Councillor Ray Godwin visit to view the stone for the first time, but will the stone meet their expectations?
Oh, it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it's got a full flat front. Nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. That.
Yeah.
And it's got a mineralisation on it, which, if you lit that, actually, that'll probably
glisten.
sort of glisten, and sparkle a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, it is going to be
Beautiful.
lit.
Yeah.
Are you standing it up on end? Is that your plan?
Yeah.
We are so grateful.
We are so grateful.
It's symbolic. We could get stone or a memorial from anywhere, but the fact that it came from this area where so many Thornaby people lost their lives is means so much, and hopefully it'll mean so much to the people left behind, the survivors, and the whole of Thornaby.
Really, I've never spoken about it properly until just recently, and I've never, have I? No. Never spoken about it, but I've thought about it. All these years, no one has ever said about a memorial anymore.
The installation is planned for Thornaby Town Hall forecourt this year. Thornaby is to have a proper memorial to those who were killed at Dibbles Bridge, over 40 years after the tragedy.
It's amazing, isn't it? One of the roses that I've just thrown into the stream, it's stuck in a little pool in the sunshine, has no intentions of moving. I think it's a very fitting tribute. God bless Nan.